The year is 1861. The United States is a young nation, but already divided by questions it has avoided since its founding. Across its cities, farms, rivers, and railroads, a quiet tension has hardened into certainty. Compromise has failed. Politics has reached its limit. What follows is not a single story, nor the journey of one individual. It is a historical account of a nation at war with itself. This is the American Civil War, told as it unfolded, through causes and consequences, through strategy, suffering, and transformation, through decisions made far from the battlefield, and their effects felt everywhere. This is a documentary-style history, grounded in recorded events, military realities, and social change. It does not seek heroes or villains, but understanding. Settle in. Listen carefully. The war is about to begin. Part 1. The year is 1850. The United States is not yet at war, but the conditions that will make war unavoidable are already firmly in place. From the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River, and steadily westward beyond it, the nation expands with confidence and speed. Railroads are laid, cities grow, industry increases. New territories apply for admission as states. To many Americans, the country appears to be fulfilling its promise of progress and prosperity. Beneath this surface, however, lies a conflict that has existed since the nation's founding and has never been resolved. It is a conflict not merely of policy, but of structure, between two fundamentally different economic systems, social orders, and moral worldviews. At its center stands the institution of slavery. By the middle of the 19th century, slavery is deeply entrenched in the southern states. Nearly 4 million people are held in bondage, their forced labor forming the backbone of an agricultural economy dominated by cotton. Cotton production has become so profitable that it ties the southern economy not only to northern financial institutions, but to global markets as well. This dependence reinforces a system in which land ownership, political power, and social status are inseparable from slavery itself. In the northern states, slavery has largely been abolished. Economic development follows a different path. Factories, shipyards, railroads, and commercial centers expand rapidly. Wage labor replaces plantation agriculture. Immigration increases, reshaping cities and labor markets. While racism and inequality persist, the northern economy no longer depends upon enslaved labor to function. For decades, these differences have been managed through compromise. Political agreements attempt to preserve balance between slave states and free states. Each compromise delays confrontation, but fails to eliminate the underlying tension. As the nation expands westward, the same question repeatedly resurfaces: whether slavery will be allowed to spread into new territories. The Missouri Compromise, enacted in 1820, attempts to draw a geographic boundary between slavery and freedom. It succeeds temporarily, but it establishes a precedent that the nation's future will be negotiated state by state, territory by territory, crisis by crisis. Each new acquisition of land intensifies the stakes. The conclusion of the Mexican-American War in 1848 adds vast new territories to the United States. Almost immediately, political conflict erupts over whether slavery will be permitted in these lands. The Compromise of 1850 attempts to calm the situation. California enters the Union as a free state, but the Fugitive Slave Act is strengthened in return. This law requires citizens and authorities in free states to assist in the capture and return of escaped enslaved people. Rather than restoring stability, the Fugitive Slave Act accelerates division. In northern cities, the realities of slavery become impossible to ignore. Enslaved individuals are seized in public spaces and forced back into bondage. Resistance grows. Abolitionist movements gain visibility and support. What had once been considered a distant Southern institution now directly implicates Northern citizens. As tensions increase, the political system begins to fracture. Established parties collapse under the weight of sectional conflict. New alliances form around the question of slavery's expansion. The Republican Party emerges in the 1850s, opposing the spread of slavery into new territories. While its platform does not initially call for abolition where slavery already exists, Southern leaders increasingly view it as an existential threat. In response, pro-slavery ideology in the South hardens. Slavery is no longer defended as a regrettable necessity, but as a positive good, essential to social order, economic prosperity, and racial hierarchy. Mutual distrust deepens. Language grows more extreme. Compromise becomes increasingly difficult to sustain. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 introduces the principle of popular sovereignty, allowing settlers in new territories to vote on whether slavery will be permitted. Instead of resolving the issue democratically, it leads to violence. Armed factions clash in Kansas, producing a preview of the national conflict to come. Americans are now killing one another over slavery within the borders of the United States. The Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision in 1857 further destabilizes the nation. The ruling declares that enslaved people are not citizens and that Congress lacks authority to prohibit slavery in federal territories. For many in the North, the decision confirms fears that slavery has come to dominate the federal government. In the South, resistance to the ruling is taken as proof that the Union no longer protects Southern interests. Political norms continue to erode. Violence enters the halls of Congress itself. Public discourse grows increasingly uncompromising. By the end of the 1850s, faith in peaceful resolution has largely disappeared. The presidential election of 1860 becomes the breaking point. Abraham Lincoln, representing the Republican Party, wins the presidency without carrying a single Southern state. Though he repeatedly assures voters that he will not interfere with slavery where it already exists, Southern leaders no longer believe such assurances matter. The loss of political control at the federal level is seen as irreversible. Beginning with South Carolina in December 1860, Southern states move toward secession. One by one, they formally withdraw from the Union. By early 1861, 11 states have left, forming the Confederate States of America. Their declarations make clear that the preservation of slavery lies at the core of their decision. The federal government rejects secession as unconstitutional. President Lincoln maintains that the Union is perpetual and that no state may lawfully leave it. Two governments now claim authority over the same land, the same people, and the same military installations. Among these installations is Fort Sumter, located in Charleston Harbor. It becomes a focal point of the crisis. Confederate authorities demand its surrender. The Union refuses. In the early hours of April 12, 1861, Confederate artillery opens fire. The American Civil War has begun. No one is killed in the initial bombardment, but the symbolic weight of the moment is immense. Political conflict has given way to armed force. The fracture that has shaped the nation for generations has become an open break. Across the country, volunteers enlist in large numbers. Many believe the war will be brief. Few understand the scale of destruction that lies ahead. The United States is about to enter the deadliest conflict in its history, a war that will test its institutions, redefine its values, and permanently alter its future. The first shots have been fired. There is no turning back. Part 2. mobilization, illusion, and escalation. 1861 to 1862. The opening shots at Fort Sumter echo far beyond Charleston Harbor. Across the United States, the reality of war settles in with a speed that surprises even those who expected conflict. President Lincoln issues a call for volunteers to suppress the rebellion. Southern states, still undecided, are forced to choose sides. Some remain loyal to the Union. Others join the Confederacy, expanding the scale of the conflict almost immediately. Both governments now face the same urgent challenge: transforming civilian populations into armies capable of sustained warfare. In the spring of 1861, neither side is prepared for a prolonged conflict. The United States Army is small, scattered across distant frontier posts, and designed primarily for policing territories rather than fighting a large-scale war. The Confederacy, newly formed, must build an entire military structure from scratch while under blockade and international scrutiny. Early enthusiasm masks deep structural weaknesses. Men volunteer with little training. Units are often organized by town or region, commanded by officers elected by their peers rather than appointed for competence. Uniforms are inconsistent. Weapons are in short supply. Logistics are improvised. Despite these limitations, both sides expect a quick resolution. In July 1861, Union forces advance toward Richmond, Virginia, the Confederate capital. The resulting battle, fought near a small stream known as Bull Run, becomes the first major land engagement of the war. Civilians from Washington travel to observe, expecting a spectacle rather than a catastrophe. Instead, the Union Army collapses under pressure. Confederate forces, disorganized but determined, drive them back toward Washington in a chaotic retreat. Panic spreads through the North. The illusion of a short war ends abruptly. From this moment forward, expectations change. The scale of the conflict becomes clearer. The mobilization accelerates. By the end of 1861, hundreds of thousands of men are under arms. The Union benefits from greater population, industrial capacity, and transportation infrastructure. Its factories produce weapons, uniforms, and ammunition at an increasing rate. Railroads enable rapid movement of troops and supplies. A powerful navy begins enforcing a blockade of southern ports, aiming to choke the Confederacy's access to international trade. The Confederacy, despite these disadvantages, possesses significant strengths of its own. Many battles are fought on Southern soil, giving Confederate forces familiarity with terrain and local support. Southern military leadership includes experienced officers, many of whom served in the United States Army before secession. Defensive strategy favors the side attempting to preserve territory rather than conquer it. As 1861 turns to 1862, the war expands geographically. Fighting spreads across multiple theaters simultaneously. In the East, armies clash repeatedly in Virginia. In the West, Union forces push along rivers that serve as natural highways into Confederate territory. Control of waterways becomes as important as control of land. The Mississippi River emerges as a strategic priority. Whoever controls it can split the Confederacy in two, severing supply lines and isolating regions from one another. Union forces begin a slow, methodical campaign to gain dominance along its length. Naval warfare evolves rapidly. Ironclad ships replace wooden vessels in some engagements. New technologies, rifled muskets, improved artillery, telegraph communication, alter the nature of combat. Tactics struggle to keep pace with firepower, contributing to rising casualty rates. As battles grow larger, the human cost becomes impossible to ignore. Soldiers face conditions that test physical and mental endurance. Camps are crowded, sanitation is poor, disease spreads quickly,
Dysentery, typhoid, and pneumonia kill more men than combat itself. Medical knowledge is limited. Surgery is often performed without anesthesia beyond alcohol or rudimentary chloroform. Amputation becomes common, not out of cruelty, but necessity. Civilian life is also transformed. In the North, war production reshapes the economy. Women enter industrial work in greater numbers. Inflation affects daily life. Political debates intensify over conscription, civil liberties, and the conduct of the war.
In the South, the impact is more immediate and severe. The Union blockade restricts imports of food, medicine, and manufactured goods. Inflation accelerates rapidly. Shortages become widespread. Enslaved people begin to flee plantations whenever Union armies approach, undermining the labor system that sustains the Southern economy. The question of slavery itself becomes increasingly central to the war's conduct. Initially, the Union government frames the conflict as an effort to preserve the nation rather than to abolish slavery. This position is partly strategic, aimed at maintaining loyalty in border states where slavery still exists. On the ground, however, reality overtakes policy. As enslaved people escape to Union lines, commanders must decide what to do with them. Early responses vary, but a pattern emerges. Freedom follows Union advance. Enslaved individuals are classified as contraband of war, refusing to return them to Confederate owners. By 1862, pressure grows within the Union government to clarify the war's purpose. Abolitionists argue that slavery fuels the Confederate war effort and that its destruction is both morally necessary and militarily advantageous. Others worry that a shift toward emancipation will alienate loyal slaveholding states and provoke international complications. Meanwhile, the scale of combat continues to increase. Battles such as Shiloh in the Western Theater shock both sides with unprecedented casualty numbers. Tens of thousands of men are killed, wounded, or missing over the course of 2 days. The idea that bravery and enthusiasm alone can determine victory collapses under the weight of reality. Commanders learn through failure. Strategy evolves slowly and painfully. Attrition becomes a defining feature of the conflict. Victory is no longer measured in territory gained alone, but in the enemy's capacity to continue fighting. Leadership on both sides is tested relentlessly. Some generals rise to the demands of modern warfare. Others are removed after costly mistakes. Political pressure weighs heavily on military decisions. Civilian governments struggle to balance public opinion with strategic necessity. By late 1862, the war has transformed the United States. What began as a limited effort to suppress secession has become a massive national mobilization. Casualty lists lengthen. Mourning becomes a shared experience across regions. The idea of returning to the pre-war status quo fades. The Battle of Antietam, fought in September 1862, marks another turning point. It is tactically inconclusive, but it halts a Confederate invasion of the North. More importantly, it provides President Lincoln with the political opportunity he has been waiting for. Days later, he announces the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. The war's meaning shifts decisively. From this point forward, the conflict is no longer solely about preserving the Union. It is explicitly tied to the destruction of slavery in rebelling states. The decision reshapes domestic politics, international diplomacy, and the lives of millions. The war is entering a new phase. The stakes are higher, the cost is clearer, and the path to peace is longer than anyone first imagined. Part 3. Emancipation, Turning Points, and the Nature of Total War. 1863
to 1864. By the beginning of 1863, the American Civil War has already consumed hundreds of thousands of lives. What began as a political crisis has become an industrial-scale conflict that reaches into every corner of the nation. The illusion of restraint is gone. The war has hardened, and with it, the societies fighting it. On January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation takes effect. It declares that all enslaved people in states still in rebellion against the Union are free. The proclamation does not immediately liberate every enslaved person in the country, nor does it end slavery in border states loyal to the Union. Its power lies elsewhere. It transforms the legal and moral framework of the war. From this point forward, the Union is fighting not only to restore the nation, but to destroy slavery as an institution within the Confederacy. The conflict becomes inseparable from the question of human freedom. The proclamation also alters the international dimension of the war. European powers, particularly Britain and France, had considered recognizing the Confederacy or intervening diplomatically. With the war now explicitly linked to emancipation, such support becomes politically untenable. The Confederacy's hopes for foreign recognition fade. Within the Union, the decision deepens political divisions. Some support emancipation as a moral necessity. Others fear it will prolong the war or destabilize society. Resistance grows in certain regions, including violent opposition to conscription and racial integration. The war effort continues, but unity is fragile. For enslaved people across the South, the proclamation represents both hope and uncertainty. Freedom often arrives only as Union armies advance. Many flee plantations, seeking refuge behind Union lines. Others wait, constrained by geography, violence, and the limits of enforcement. Nevertheless, the institution of slavery begins to collapse under the pressure of war. The Union also authorizes the enlistment of black soldiers. By the end of the war, nearly 180,000 African American men will serve in the Union Army, with tens of thousands more in the Navy. Their service is often met with discrimination, unequal pay, and extreme risk. Captured black soldiers may be enslaved or executed rather than treated as prisoners of war. Despite these dangers, their participation becomes a critical component of the Union war effort. As 1863 unfolds, military campaigns intensify. Both sides seek decisive victories that might end the war or shift momentum permanently. None prove more consequential than the summer campaigns in the East and West. In July 1863, Confederate forces under General Robert E. Lee launch a second invasion of the North. The campaign culminates near the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Over 3 days of fighting, massive armies collide in what becomes the largest battle ever fought in North America. The scale is unprecedented. Infantry charges sweep across open fields under heavy fire. Artillery pounds defensive positions. Entire units are shattered. Casualties exceed 50,000. When the fighting ends, the Confederate Army retreats southward, never again to launch a major invasion of Northern territory. Almost simultaneously, Union forces capture the city of Vicksburg on the Mississippi River. With this victory, the Union gains full control of the river, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. Supply lines are severed. Strategic mobility is crippled. Together, Gettysburg and Vicksburg mark a decisive turning point. The Confederacy remains capable of resistance, but the strategic initiative now lies firmly with the Union. The war, however, is far from over.
As 1863 turns to 1864, the conflict enters its most destructive phase. Union leadership undergoes significant change.
Ulysses S. Grant is appointed General-in-Chief of all Union armies. His strategy is direct and relentless. Rather than seeking isolated victories, he aims to apply continuous pressure across all theaters, exploiting the Union's superior manpower and resources. Grant understands that the Confederacy cannot replace its losses at the same rate as the Union. Attrition becomes a deliberate strategy. Battles are fought with grim acceptance of casualties, not as failures, but as steps toward inevitable exhaustion of the enemy. In the East, Grant engages Confederate forces in a series of brutal campaigns in Virginia. The fighting is intense and costly. Gains are measured in miles rather than sweeping victories. Public criticism grows as casualty lists lengthen, but the pressure never fully relents. In the West and Deep South, Union strategy evolves into what later becomes known as total war. Under General William Tecumseh Sherman, Union forces abandon the idea that civilian infrastructure can remain untouched. Railroads, factories, warehouses, and transportation networks are targeted systematically. Sherman's march through Georgia in late 1864 exemplifies this shift. His army cuts a wide path through the state, destroying rail lines, seizing supplies, and dismantling the economic foundation of Confederate resistance. The goal is not simply military defeat, but psychological collapse. For civilians in the path of these campaigns, the war becomes immediate and unavoidable. Homes are abandoned, crops are destroyed, communities disintegrate. The boundary between battlefield and civilian life disappears. The Confederacy struggles to respond. Its armies fight with determination, but resources dwindle. Desertion increases, food shortages worsen, inflation spirals. Enslaved labor continues to erode as more people escape or resist. By the end of 1864, the Confederacy's strategic position is dire. Its territory has been reduced, its armies are increasingly confined, its civilian population is exhausted. Yet surrender does not come easily. The cost of defeat is understood to be immense. In the North, the war also tests resolve. The presidential election of 1864 takes place amid ongoing combat. War weariness is widespread. The outcome will determine whether the Union continues its current strategy or seeks a negotiated peace. Lincoln is re-elected. The decision signals a commitment to see the war through to its conclusion. The conflict has reshaped the nation. Slavery is collapsing. Warfare has transformed in scale and purpose. The end, once imagined as quick and decisive, now approaches slowly, carried forward by exhaustion rather than triumph. The final phase of the war is beginning.
Part 4. Collapse, Surrender, and the Meaning of Victory. 1865 and beyond. By the opening months of 1865, the American Civil War has reached its final and most consequential stage. The Confederacy remains in the field, but its capacity to sustain organized resistance is rapidly disintegrating. Years of blockade, battlefield losses, and internal strain have hollowed out its economy and exhausted its population. What remains is determination, discipline, and the narrowing hope that endurance alone might still produce a favorable outcome. That hope is increasingly difficult to justify. Union strategy now converges with clarity. In the East, Ulysses S. Grant maintains relentless pressure on Confederate forces defending Richmond and Petersburg, Virginia. Rather than seeking a dramatic breakthrough, he commits to continuous engagement, knowing that time and resources favor the Union. Each engagement further depletes Confederate manpower, which cannot be replaced at comparable rates. The siege of Petersburg stretches through the winter. Trenches extend for miles. Conditions are harsh. Soldiers endure cold, hunger, and constant danger from artillery and sharpshooters.
The fighting anticipates the nature of modern warfare, with fortified positions, prolonged bombardments, and attritional tactics replacing maneuver and spectacle. In the South, the effects of total war deepen. William Tecumseh Sherman's forces complete their march through Georgia and continue northward into the Carolinas. Rail networks are destroyed. Warehouses are emptied or burned. Crops are seized or rendered unusable. The objective is explicit: to break the Confederacy's ability and will to continue fighting. For Southern civilians, the consequences are devastating. Cities that once functioned as logistical hubs fall into ruin. Food shortages become acute. Inflation renders Confederate currency nearly worthless. Social order frays as local governments lose authority and resources. Enslaved people continue to flee plantations in large numbers. Some follow Union columns. Others establish independent communities or seek refuge wherever federal authority can reach them. The collapse of slavery accelerates, not as a single legal moment, but as a process driven by military reality. Confederate leadership confronts a narrowing set of options. Diplomatic recognition has failed. Foreign intervention has not materialized. Armies remain in the field, but they are increasingly isolated, undersupplied, and outnumbered. The strategic situation leaves little room for maneuver. In early April 1865, Union forces finally break through Confederate defenses at Petersburg. Richmond, the Confederate capital, is no longer defensible. Confederate authorities evacuate the city. Fires break out, consuming large portions of the urban center. Union troops enter soon after, bringing an end to Richmond's role as the political heart of the rebellion. Confederate General Robert E. Lee attempts to retreat westward with the Army of Northern Virginia, hoping to regroup or link with other Confederate forces. Union troops pursue relentlessly. Roads are crowded with retreating soldiers, abandoned equipment, and civilians fleeing the collapse of organized authority. The pursuit ends near the village of Appomattox Courthouse. On April 9, 1865, Lee meets with Grant to discuss surrender. The terms are deliberately generous. Confederate soldiers are allowed to return home. Officers may keep their sidearms. The aim is reconciliation, not humiliation. Grant understands that the war's conclusion must lay the groundwork for peace, not continued resistance. The surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia effectively ends the war. Other Confederate forces surrender in the weeks that follow. Armed resistance collapses across the remaining territories. The American Civil War is over.
The scale of its cost becomes increasingly clear. Estimates of total deaths range from approximately 620,000 to more than 750,000, making it the deadliest conflict in United States history. Entire regions have been devastated. Families across the nation mourn losses that will shape their lives for decades. Only days after the surrender at Appomattox, President Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. The nation, poised between relief and uncertainty, is plunged into shock and grief. Lincoln's death removes the leader most closely associated with reconciliation and measured reconstruction. His absence profoundly affects the course of the post-war era. The Union has been preserved. Slavery as a legal institution is finished. In December 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution formally abolishes slavery throughout the United States. What emancipation means in practice, however, remains unresolved. The end of the war marks the beginning of Reconstruction, a period defined by conflicting visions of the nation's future. The federal government faces the challenge of reintegrating former Confederate states, defining the rights of formerly enslaved people, and rebuilding a shattered economy. Progress is uneven and contested. Amendments to the Constitution establish citizenship and equal protection under the law.
Black men vote and hold public office in unprecedented numbers during the early Reconstruction years. Public education expands, new institutions emerge. At the same time, resistance to these changes is fierce. White supremacist organizations use violence and intimidation to undermine political participation. Southern states enact laws designed to restrict freedom in practice, even as slavery is formally abolished. Federal commitment fluctuates. Over time, many Reconstruction gains are reversed or weakened. The Civil War's legacy extends far beyond its immediate aftermath. It reshapes the balance of power between the federal government and the states, establishing national authority as supreme. It accelerates industrialization. It alters military doctrine. It transforms the Constitution from a framework that tolerated slavery into one that explicitly rejects it. Memory of the war becomes contested terrain. Different regions and communities interpret its causes and consequences in sharply different ways. Monuments are raised, narratives are constructed, myths take root alongside facts. The struggle over meaning becomes part of the nation's ongoing history. Yet certain realities remain undeniable. The war was fought primarily over the future of slavery. It resolved the question of whether the Union could survive internal division. It demonstrated the destructive power of modern warfare. And it left unresolved questions about equality, justice, and national identity that continue to shape the United States. The American Civil War was not a single moment of violence, but a transformation measured in years of suffering and change. It altered the relationship between citizens and the state, between labor and freedom, between ideals and reality. When the guns fell silent in 1865, the nation did not return to what it had been before. It became something else entirely. A country preserved, but deeply scarred. A system destroyed, but not fully replaced. A future opened, but contested. The war ended. Its consequences did not.